Hello, I'm Kingsley Singleton and welcome to the second part of this video lesson on combining multiple raw conversions. In the first part we made 3 separate raw conversions from the same original file. So you can see that we converted it once for the background here, once for the midground and once for the foreground, making sure that we had brilliant exposure and lighting in each area. What we're going to do this time around is combine all of those images into the same picture, just like the one you can see down here at the bottom right. We're going to do that using the Layers palette, so without further ado I'll close down our example image there, and you should have got to this point if you're following along with me. You should have 3 conversions called Yosemite 1, 2 and 3, each one processed slightly differently depending on which part of the scene you want to be well lit. So whether you're following along using the same raw file as me, that's yosemite.dng, which you'll find in the Start Images folder on the CD or via the download, or using one of your own shots, you should be at this stage with 3 differently processed images. It doesn't have to be 3, of course. You can do this technique by making 2 raw conversions from the same file, and in the steps that follow I'll show you how to merge them. So to do that, to merge our pictures, we first need to get them into the same document. The easiest way to do that is to use the copy and paste commands within Photoshop. So what we'll first do is click on the second of our conversions, that's yosemite2.jpg, and we'll come up to Select and down to All. At that point the whole canvas will be selected, and then we'll come up to Edit and down to Copy to record everything into memory. Then we'll click back on the first conversion that we made, and we'll come up to Edit and down to Paste. Now what happens then is our copied picture drops in, and it sits above the original in the Layers palette. So let's do the same again with our third conversion. It's up to Select and down to All, or you can press Ctrl and A on the keyboard. Then it's up to Edit and Copy, or you can press Ctrl and C as the shortcut. And then back on our first conversion, Edit and Paste, or Ctrl and V on the keyboard. With that done, we can close our other conversions down. So we'll just hit the X there to get rid of those, and then we can just expand the size of this one to get a good view of it, and we'll bring the Layers palette on screen by coming up to Window and down to Layers. And I'll just drag that out of the panel bin there and get rid of that. So we've got a nice clean workspace in front of us. Now what you can see here is 3 layers in the Layers palette. The background, which is the original conversion that we made, and then we have layer 1, the first picture we copied in, and layer 2, which is the second. We can control the visibility of these pictures in the Layers palette by clicking on and off the eye icon. So if we only want to see the original conversion, there it is. There's our slightly lighter one for the midground, and there's our lightest one for the foreground. And the really clever thing is that by making these 3 raw conversions from exactly the same file, they all line up perfectly. So when we start to blend them together using layer masks, we won't get any weird ghosting or fringing effects. And you can see that if I drop the opacity of the top layer here, just clicking on the downward facing arrow there and dropping it, we can control the amount of that lightened layer that's showing through, and everything lines up perfectly. Now what we're going to need to do is be a little bit more selective in how our layers interact with one another, because we can't just do this using the opacity slider. What we're going to have to do is use either the eraser tool or layer masks within the Layers palette to control which parts of the layers are seen. First off, we're going to concentrate on the bottom 2 layers, so I'm going to hide layer 2 just by clicking the eye icon there. You can see that it disappears, meaning it's now invisible, and then we'll click back on layer 1 to make it active. The next thing I'm going to do is add a layer mask to this layer, and we can do that in one of 2 ways. We can either click on the Add Layer Mask icon there in the Layers palette, or we can come up to Layer, down to Layer Mask, and pick Reveal All. As soon as you do that, you'll get a white rectangle appear next to the thumbnail there, and this is the layer mask that we're going to be working on in order to blend our 2 conversions. At this stage though, if you're working in an older version of Photoshop Elements, you'll have just found out that you don't have layer masks. Well, don't worry, there is a workaround, and it simply involves using the eraser tool. I'll quickly show you that just by clicking and dragging our layer mask into the dustbin there in the Layers palette, and we'll just select Delete. And then we'll come over to the toolbox, click on the eraser tool, then up in the options bar, make sure that we've got a soft edge brush, set its size up at around about 8 or 900 pixels. Finally, make sure that the opacity is set to 100%, and then you'll see that by making sure that layer 1 is highlighted in the layers palette there, if it's not, just give it a click. If we click with the eraser tool and we just paint over those areas that we want to get rid of, we can let the layer below show through. So everywhere we erase on layer 1, we can see the background layer, and that's our darkest conversion. Now, giving it a few clicks, we can just start bringing our distant trees and mountain in there, and then we can drop our opacity down to 20 or 30%, and we can just click a few more times on the image just to blend those two exposures in really nicely. So that's how we go about it using the eraser tool. You can see that by clicking on and off the eye icon there, we've got a little bit of the original background layer and a little bit of our midground conversion, and the two are starting to work really well. From this point on though, I'm going to use layer masks instead because they're a better way of working, they let you correct mistakes more easily, and they're available in both the full version of Photoshop and more recent versions of Photoshop Elements. So I'll just bring our undo history onto the screen here, and we'll just move back to the point before we started erasing and get rid of that again. And then we'll add our layer mask, once again using that icon in the layers palette. Give it a click, the layer mask appears, and at this point we need to switch to the brush tool because this is how we're going to be controlling our layer mask. We're going to be painting black or white into it to have a very similar effect to the eraser, hiding and revealing different parts of the layer that the mask is attached to. So the way that layer masks work is if you paint black into them, it hides the layer that you're working on, and if you paint white, it reveals it. So a white mask reveals everything on the layer, and a black mask reveals none of it. You can see this in action once I've got my brush tool set up. So once again, we'll pick a soft edge brush there, and we'll set its size up to about 8 or 900 pixels. And then make sure that black is set as your foreground color. If it isn't, just press D on the keyboard to set your default foreground and background colors, and then X to switch them around. And then with our opacity set up at 100%, we can just click on any areas of the picture that we want to mask out. So really we're going to be concentrating on this area here with the distant mountain and trees. And you can see there that as I'm clicking, black is appearing within our layer mask, and that means we're hiding this layer and we're allowing the darker layer below to show through. So a few dabs just to start off with near the very top of the image and anywhere where it's obviously losing detail. And then just as we did with the eraser tool briefly, we'll take the opacity down to about 20 or 30%, and we'll just continue then to paint into the mask. We're just clicking directly onto the image, and now we're painting a shade of grey, so we're just kind of more subtly altering the opacity of the layer, and with a few clicks we can just blend those two layers nicely. Now if you take a look at the mask that I've started painting here, you can see we've got a mixture of white and black and grey, and if I hold down the Alt key and click on it, you can see a preview of it there over the image. All you need to remember really is that those black areas are masking the current layer, letting the one below show through, and that the white areas are doing the opposite, while the grey areas are doing something in between. So we can hold down the Alt key and click on the mask again to return to our regular image. And that's pretty much all the masking that we need to do for our first layer there, layer 1, and we can now move on to layer 2, which is the one at the top. So let's turn it back on using the eye icon, and then we can do just the same as before. So we'll click on it to make it active, then we'll add our layer mask, and then making sure that our opacity is set up to 100% to start with, we can just start painting over the image to hide parts of that layer. So this time we're going to be painting a little more broadly over the image, but we're going to be ignoring those parts down at the bottom, and mainly the bottom left where we want that last conversion to be more dominant. So very quickly we'll bring our opacity down again to about 30%, and then we'll just start building up a few layers of grey in there just to soften the effect and blend those different conversions in really nicely. So we can work down a little lower, and maybe we can even bring in a little bit of those darker tones at the very foot of the image. But just with a few sweeps really, we get just the kind of blending that we're looking for. So very quickly you can see that by using those multiple conversions from the same raw file and then combining them using layer masks or the eraser tool in Photoshop or Elements helps you create a picture with brilliant lighting all the way through it. And it's a million miles away from our original badly composed raw file. Now remember when I said that correcting mistakes was much easier when using layer masks? Well, here's a good example. If you've painted too much and you want to bring a bit of that lightness back, all you need to do is switch over to white as your foreground colour, and then down here at the foot of the image we can just paint back any of those areas that we want to, and that applies all over your layer mask and even on the layer mask that you've painted on the layer below. So you can continue to edit these throughout the process of blending your multiple exposures together, and just switch back to black if you want to continue masking. All that's left to do is flatten the image, so we'll come up to layer and down to flatten image. That'll take all of our different conversions, our different layers, back into a single background layer, which we can then save as our finished image. So it's up to File, down to Save As, and this time we'll call it Yosemite Final. Click Save. Once again, set that JPEG quality up nice and high and click OK. Now of course this doesn't need to be the end of the story. You can continue enhancing the picture using the various tools within Photoshop itself, but in terms of combining our multiple raw conversions, we're all done. So give it a try with the start image, that's yosemite.dng. You'll find it in the start images folder on the CD or via the download. And make sure you try it out on your own pictures too, because it's a great way to control colour and exposure across your images. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.